So at this point, Descartes adds another premise, which is that there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause of some effect as in the effect. So if you think about it this way, think about anything that happens. Say a book, falls to the floor. A book is let go and it falls to the floor. The idea there is the efficient and total cause of the book falling to the floor is gravity, for instance, the force of gravity. So there must be at least as much reality in gravity as there is in the book. Maybe there's just as much reality in gravity as there is in the book, but there can't be any less reality in gravity than there is in the book, or else there wouldn't be sufficient force to move the book in the way that gravity does. So if anything that happens, if it's caused to happen by something else, then the thing that causes it to happen has to itself be at least as real as the thing that is caused to happen. And Descartes draws a few consequences from this pretty quickly on page 22. One of the consequences that's important for the rest of his argument is that what is more perfect, that is what contains in itself more reality, he says, basically packing into this premise the idea that what's more perfect is more real than what's less perfect. Okay, so he says what's more perfect cannot come into being from what is less perfect. So just like there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in the effect of that cause, so there must be at least as much perfection in the efficient and total cause of something as there is in the effect of that thing. Okay, so again, a less perfect thing can't make a more perfect thing. Perfection can only come from things that are as perfect as the perfect thing that is made by them. Now, at this point, there's a bit of a break in the argument, but it's really just kind of an introduction of a new theme. Descartes says, I'm now going to look at my ideas from the standpoint of whether or not they could have come from inside me or have to have come from outside me. So referring back to premise one, if all of my ideas either come from inside me or come from outside of me, then now what I want to do is I want to look at each one and ask, could it have just come from inside me? If the answer is yes, then since I'm still in a process of doubting everything that I can, I'm going to say, okay, maybe those things don't really exist. But if there is any idea that I have where the idea itself couldn't possibly have come just from me, then that will be an argument that there must be something outside of me, at least powerful enough to produce that idea. Okay? So premise 4 says, the contents of my ideas of a lot of things that I have ideas of, like humans, animals, angels, and corporeal things, are such that I could have produced them myself. So by corporeal thing, by the way, Descartes means bodily thing. He means a thing that takes up space, a physical thing, we might call it. And Descartes gives some arguments for P4, which I haven't included in the summary of the main argument. But I'll just mention them here because they're worth noting. So one is that humans, angels, and animals, he thinks, or he argues, could all have been produced as composites from my ideas that I have of myself, like my ideas of my own mind and ideas I have of corporeal things, that is bodily things. So the idea there is that the idea of a human, of another human, or the idea of an animal, is the idea of something that's a kind of combination of physical matter, physical stuff, corporeal things, bodies, and some kind of mental stuff, thoughts, emotions, and so on. And I can come up with that. I can produce that composite idea just by relying on ideas of corporeal things, bodily things, if I already have those ideas, and ideas of my own mind, which I can have directly by looking at the cogito. So it seems like it's at least possible that my ideas of humans, animals, and angels could have been produced by myself, so long as we grant that I'm able to produce ideas of corporeal things, or that I already know corporeal things, and that I'm able to produce ideas through reflection on my own mind, the cogito. And about believing that my ideas of corporeal things could have been produced by myself, Descartes considers this question in two steps. He notes that some of my ideas of bodily things are not very clear and distinct, as he calls it. So these are kind of fuzzy ideas that we have of bodily things. An example he gives is hot and cold. So he says, my ideas of hot and cold are so confused. When I look at them closely, they're sort of muddled, that I don't even know whether things in whether hotness is a feature of real objects in the world, whether coldness is a feature of real objects in the world, or whether coldness is just the absence of heat, or perhaps heat is the absence of coldness. And I don't even know, which of those is accurate. I mean, when I feel something is cold, do I feel it's cold because there's not enough heat there, or am I feeling something that is really there, which is the coldness? He says, this is very confusing. It's hard to tell. And that suggests to me that these features of corporeal things like their being hot or cold, are very unclear, and could easily have been produced just from myself, my own sensations, my own reflections. So my idea of hot and cold, for instance, could easily have just been produced from my own sensations of things. And part of the reason why I can be confident in that, he thinks, is because those ideas are so confused and not entirely consistent or clear. When we look at them more closely, we find they're not that clear. On the other hand, when we look at those ideas we have that of bodily things that are clear and distinct, and here Descartes gives examples of the idea of substance, the idea of duration, the idea of taking up space, of having a certain size or position. These are ideas that are clear and distinct because, for one thing, we can describe them, duration and space and position, for instance, we can describe them mathematically. We can get very refined descriptions, very detailed and careful descriptions of things, and know what follows from what in our models. So we do have some clear and distinct ideas of corporeal things, but all of these ideas we could have just produced from our own minds as well, because our minds are able to draw geometrical diagrams that express things like distances and size. Duration is something we experience. We experience the flow of time or passage of time in ourselves. So that's something we could be projecting, and we could, just be kind of repeating or, producing or generating out of ourselves as a seeming description of corporeal things. So again, it's not impossible that even these clear and distinct ideas of corporeal things could have been just produced by us and don't correspond to anything that exists outside of us. Substance, likewise, because Descartes says, I know what a substance is by looking at my own mind. I experience myself as a substance, as a thing that exists and has a kind of internal cohesion and structure and continues to exist through time and can undergo variations but remains the same basic thing. And that's really the idea of a substance. So how do we know that our idea of external things that are substances, things like rocks, tables, chairs, and so on, how do we know that those ideas of external substances aren't just projections of our own understanding of ourselves as substances? We don't know that, Descartes thinks. So the main point of this premise 4, that all of these reasons I've shared here are supposed to support. The main point of premise 4, though, the thesis itself in premise 4, is that we don't know for sure that our ideas of humans, angels, and so on don't just come from our own minds. Okay? The contents of those ideas are not such that they have to be produced by something outside of us. The contents of those things are such that they could have been produced by us. It seems at least possible that they are merely products of our own mind. So we can't know just by looking at the contents of those ideas. We can't know for sure that there is an external world that corresponds to